Welcome to the Drive Home Reviews podcast, where I review the movies I have just seen while driving home from the theater. And boy, oh boy, we have got a hot button topic today. We are going to be taking a look at one of the most despised films that I have ever seen. This is a movie that it feels like this thing has been in the crosshairs of just about everyone from the moment it was announced. And everybody has had some kind of issue with this movie that range from your standard bigoted, conservative bullshit. Oh, they cast a Latina as Snow White. The world is coming to an end. To some actual legitimate criticism, such as the inclusion of, pardon the terminology, of dwarves in a 21st century film. So I looked this up yesterday because I don't pay attention to a lot of these early release hate campaigns, because one, they're mostly clickbait. They're people trying to just get as many views as they can by being as negative as they can, as loud as they can, and so I don't want to waste my time or give them the satisfaction of my views to see what exactly the issue is here. And two, listening to some of these people literally makes me cry, because it just speaks to the downfall of all humanity, in my opinion. But yesterday, before seeing this film, I actually went on and found a timeline of all of the shit that people have been mad at this movie, or the people involved in this movie, or whatever. And I gotta tell you, folks, again, it ranges from the piddling to the justifiable questions that should be asked kind of thing. You take that, you take also the fact that I have long been an outspoken opponent of these Disney live-action remakes. I think, generally speaking, they are pointless, disposable cinema that is looking to cash in on nostalgia and don't do a particularly good job. That I think at best they're forgettable. At worst, they have absolutely no reason to exist. We'll talk about the different kinds of these here in a minute, because I've noticed there are kind of different levels of these films. So, armed with all of that, also armed with the fact that I have not been a fan of most of the people involved with this movie, just in terms of their other work, not necessarily of them as actors or filmmakers, but just of other things I've seen them in. Rachel Zegler, I saw West Side Story, I saw The Hunger Games that she was in, didn't really like either one of those films. Gal Gadot, I despise the Snyderverse DC movies. I saw her in a couple, lame action movies. I felt like she's been primarily a charisma vacuum throughout a lot of her career. The guy who directed the two amazing Spider-Man movies. So this film had a lot going against it by the time I sat down to view it. So the last thing that I was expecting was to enjoy this movie. And even further from that, I certainly wasn't expecting to find this movie absolutely delightful And the only one of these live-action remakes that I feel had any reason to fucking exist. Folks, I am not kidding, and I am just as surprised as you are. I haven't been this surprised to see a movie since I went and saw Bumblebee, after hating every single Michael Bay Transformers movie that came out before or since. And seeing that and going, oh my God, this is delightful. I had that exact same reaction watching this film. I suddenly realized that I was very engaged. And I was very, very interested in what they had done with this movie. This movie is really good. I was expecting it to be, like I say, just kind of forgettable. Another one of these live-action, disposable Disney remakes. But God help me, I really freaking enjoyed it. And I enjoyed a lot of aspects of it. That doesn't mean it's perfect. We'll talk about that. But it was actually very, very good. So let's talk about this and let's dissect this while also looking at some of the criticisms that have been hurled at this film. One of the first things I read, aside, again, we're not going to touch on the bigoted, conservative bullshit of, them casting a Latina as Snow White and having some kind of problem with that, that's a whole other deal that I don't want to touch. But I noticed that one of the things, apparently Rachel Zegler got herself in some trouble when she dared make the statement that the original Snow White was dated. Folks, it fucking is. Okay? It's very dated. It's a movie that came out in the 30s. It came out in the 30s, folks, based on a fairy tale written more than 100 years ago at the time. Yeah, it's dated. But here's the thing, and I think this is important to make the differentiation. Dated does not necessarily mean bad. It was a product of its time. All art is a product of its time. Hell, shit from the 90s is now considered dated. And believe it or not, 20, 30, 40 years from now, the stuff we're watching now will be considered dated. Everything is a product of its time. And yes, Disney itself has been making meta references to the outdated modes of its earlier films for at least the past decade. And this is the one that felt like it was most in need of kind of a modern eye. So let's delve a little deeper to that. I mentioned previously that I have not been a fan of these live-action remakes. I feel like there are only, I can't remember how many I counted. Was it maybe 3 or 4 categories that these things fall into. Number one, you have the shot-for-shot remake, where it's basically the exact same movie as the original with just maybe a couple different scenes here and there and some new musical numbers. You're looking at your Little Mermaids, your Lion Kings, that type of stuff. You have the fan fiction, the ones that are taking an aspect of the film, normally the villain, and framing an entire narrative around their point of view. Your Maleficents, your Cruellas. These ones are the ones I mind the least, because at least they're doing something different and new with the material. So you've got those. Then you have the ones that it seems like the only reason they exist is because Disney has been lambasted by CinemaSins and every, smartass on the internet who thinks that pointing out quote-unquote plot holes qualifies as legitimate film criticism. And so they've remade the movie kind of to try to answer all of those criticisms. You know, that's your Dumbos and your Beauty and the Beast. So you don't really have a narrative or anything new added to the story. It's all just trying to plug the perceived plot holes. Oh, she's got Stockholm Syndrome. Oh no, why were all the other people in the palace cursed? You know, trying to answer all these pointless questions instead of actually telling a story. In short, none of them, with the exception maybe of the fanfic ones, really have a reason to be. This is the first one of these things where I have felt that the retooling of it and the restructuring of the plot to be, I'm going to say, a little bit more proactive. I'm not even going to say modern. I'm going to say to make Snow White more of a proactive participant in her own story actually worked. So in our new story, it follows the same thing. You know, Snow White had nice parents. The mother died. The father was bewitched by a really beautiful woman who turned out to literally be a witch. He died under mysterious circumstances. The queen took over the kingdom, which was once happy-go-lucky town and now is really down in the dumps town. Basically makes Snow White a servant until deciding that, you know, she's the fairest of them all. I also like how this one redefines the definition of fair and how the two characters, our two primary characters, look at it. That the queen is, you know, vain, and therefore her definition of fair is, of course, her beauty. The mirror's definition, as it applies to Snow White, is someone who is fair and just and a good person. I like that very subtle adjustment. And so, of course, you know, it follows the whole thing, the huntsman and blah, blah, blah. But Snow White basically becomes a Disney version of Katniss Everdeen and basically organizes a resistance to reclaim the kingdom from the queen. That's what I really enjoy about this. Is that now you can see how this could go in a couple of different ways, and none of them being particularly successful, or all of them feeling very pandering. You know, what I appreciate about this is that Snow White never becomes, you know, Snow White warrior princess. She never becomes, like, you know, going to lead the revolution. She doesn't really become Katniss Everdeen. I use that as a point of comparison, because that's essentially what she kind of does in this, is becomes a figurehead and a rallying point for all of these people, is that she conquers the queen and her rule with compassion by standing up to a bully and encouraging other people to do the same. There's no big action set piece in this. There's no big final Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones battle scene. There's a standoff of ideals and an ideology, which, you know, I'm going to segue. I'm going to talk about that right now. You know, one of the other things I talked about, obviously, this conservative backlash, you know, blah, blah, blah. But I can understand why conservatives would be, especially in this climate, would be very terrified and really hate this movie. Because this movie, the queen is a rich bitch who basically exploits the working class and the economically downtrodden to bolster her position and make herself more powerful and to raise her up above everyone else. Whereas Snow White's viewpoint is that of community, togetherness, understanding, compassion, and that building a better kingdom is building a better kingdom for everyone and not just the person in charge. yeah, I can totally see why current Republicans and conservatives would have a fucking problem with that. And what I like about this movie and this new take on the theme is that it's done in a way that I would consider to be very subtle. Disney has a hard time, I've noticed, with its social commentary. It tends to come off very heavy-handed. I think of Zootopia. Zootopia's metaphor is incredibly heavy-handed and laid on very, very, very thick. This one, I feel like it's a little more subtle. And I appreciated that. I appreciate that, again, Snow White has a journey, a character arc. And she's not just kind of a victim and a simpering, high-pitched, no disrespect to the original voice actress, but God almighty, that voice just got old after a while. Okay, let's segue into this. Okay, this is one of the elements of this movie that does have some legitimacy to people having concerns, and that, the actors have expressed various political views. One is pro-Palestine, one is pro-Israel. It's been, that's a minefield, literally. I am not going to get into that, mainly because I'm not smart enough to. I have a hard time keeping up with, who we're supposed to be rooting for and who we're supposed to be against, So I am not going to get into any of that. Now, if that is something that matters to you, then I kind of think that that's on the individual to decide where they're willing to go and how far they're willing to venture. I think everybody has their own breaking point, their own line in the sand. For instance, I cannot in good conscience give money to J.K. Rowling. I can't do it. It's that line for me. I can't support people who support Trump. I can't do it. It's a bridge too far. That's me. And if someone being pro-Palestine or pro-Israel is the line too far for you, then I respect that. Everybody has to kind of have their own moral compass and follow it. What I am going to judge right now is just what is up on the screen. I'm not judging these people in terms of their political beliefs or their political stances. This is all about what I see on the screen. And what I see on the screen is, in terms of Rachel Ziegler, and I'm mispronouncing her name, sorry. I just realized I was calling her the wrong name. Is an incredibly lovely, charismatic young woman with the voice of an angel. She has such fucking screen presence, such charisma, so much charisma from such a small person. And I don't know if it's just because she's standing next to Gal Gadot a lot, so she looks so much smaller, because Gal Gadot is a fairly tall woman. But she just has a delightful screen presence. I've mentioned that I was not a fan of some of her previous films, but that doesn't mean I didn't think she was good in them. I, again, didn't like the new West Side Story. I wasn't a fan of the Hunger Games, but she was really good in those movies, and she's really good here. I applaud her for how good of a performance and how unique and interesting a character she makes someone who was not that interesting or unique of a character to begin with. Think about it. The main unique and interesting thing about Snow White was her look, that dress. Other than that, she's kind of an empty shell of a character. And Rachel gives her humanity, gives her vulnerability, gives her strength. The character journey is believable. It doesn't feel like she suddenly leaps from one position to the next. It feels like it's a gradual thing. I like how she learns lessons from everybody that she encounters. I like that she has a knack for bringing people together. It all feels earned and well executed, and she gives an outstanding performance. And while we're talking about outstanding performances, this is, without question, the best performance I've ever seen Gal Gadot give. Like, hands down, bar none. Like, she is really good here. And I can tell she's having a ball just playing this evil queen. You know, the first Disney villain, starting a grand tradition of Disney villains. And yeah, she is in her element. And not just that, but also playing her when she's the crone. Fantastic. So yeah, I was actually really surprised, pleasantly surprised by how good of a performance Gal Gadot gives. While I'm on that, let's talk about one of the other kind of things I was taken aback by in this. So, for a lot of these Disney remakes, they add new songs, and some of the time, like for Beauty and the Beast and Little Mermaid, I feel like that's almost sacrilegious. You know, those movies are, you know, same thing with Aladdin. You know, those were, you know, those songs were already iconic. You didn't need more of them. In this one, they do add a couple of new songs, and I will be damned if they weren't pretty catchy. There are two of them that I think were really good. There's this really fun scene. So they also retooled Prince Charming. We'll talk about him in a second, where he's more of a Robin Hood type character. He's a thief, and one of the other issues that they solve is, of course, the one that everybody talks about, that, you know, Prince Charming and Snow White don't actually know each other. He just kind of shows up, bookends the plot. They actually build a relationship between them in this one, which is believable. But he has this song called Princess Problems, talking about how, you know, people in palaces don't know the plight of what's going on outside of it. That it's easy to turn a blind eye when you're living in luxury and everybody else is kind of scrounging. It's got an important message, but it's also still played out very, very fun and kind of playful between the two characters. So I like that one. The one I was not expecting to like, but actually did. Somebody decided that the Evil Queen needed a villain song. And god damn, does she glam it up. It is a fabulous villain song. And I mean fabulous in the terminology that I get the feeling like this is going to become every drag queen's new favorite number. Because, like, the entire number is staged like a drag show. I'm not kidding. Like, I'm watching it thinking, this would not look out of place having Nathan Lane do it in the birdcage. Like, and it is fabulously over the top and bitchy. Like, I loved it. And I even didn't mind that Gal Gadot, she's a better singer than I gave her credit for. She's not great, but that kind of goes along with the character. Snow White kind of is effortlessly this beautiful songbird. Hunger Games reference there. And the Evil Queen, who thinks that she's so beautiful, can't quite hit that. You know, she's a little off key. She's a little flat here and there, and that fits. So it didn't bother me, because I was like, oh, like that is actually in keeping with, the higher thematic elements of the story and the character relationship. But yeah, man, the Queen song is fabulous. Yeah, I actually really enjoyed it. I think one of the other things about this movie that's subtle, but was really kind of smart in the terms of its updating, is that this is also a film that kind of shows, this film kind of feels like a hodgepodge of a lot of different films or genres that modern audiences have seen before. I've mentioned there's a Hunger Games aspect to it. There's more than a little Game of Thrones kind of feel to it. And at first, like, the first thing I noticed was how much the evil queen, who I don't think they ever give a name to, kind of like the Beast. I don't think they ever named the Beast, even in the live action one. Anyway, the evil queen bears more than a slight resemblance in terms of outlook and a lot of her dialogue and a lot of her scenes to a certain Cersei Lannister. And at first, when that first started happening, I was a little annoyed. I was ready to rip this film apart for it. It was like, oh, you're just copying Cersei Lannister. But then I kind of thought, no, that's not what's happening here. What's actually being done is they are showing how much that original movie has influenced so many things that we now take as commonplace. The evil queen was the original Cersei Lannister. I mean, look at some of the Cersei Lannister story arc, and it matches the queen's. That Cersei heard from a soothsayer that she was going to get overthrown by someone more beautiful than her. That is the magic mirror. That's it. Likewise, I'm going to use a term here, and I'm sorry, but they use it in Lord of the Rings, and no one gets pissy. You ever notice how dwarves in these fantasy worlds are always seen as miners and craftsmen? Yeah, and everybody kind of goes, oh, J.R.R. Tolkien did that. Yeah, he did. But Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs did it first. So, what I like about it is that without kind of getting up on its soapbox, and I think people might misinterpret it as them trying to copy stuff that's being done and that's popular now, but this movie is basically saying, no, look at how much the original influenced. Again, people got pissy because Rachel dared say the original was out of date. Again, out of date doesn't mean it's bad, and it doesn't mean it wasn't influential. And this movie is kind of a love letter to everything that the original influenced, whether we knew it or not, whether we were aware of it or not. That's pretty amazing. That is, and when I realized that, and I kind of saw how that was interwoven with the narrative and this very structure, I was like, holy shit, that is pretty cool. Let's talk about the seven. I'm going to call them the seven in this review to avoid any terms that might be deemed offensive to some people. We'll talk about them in terms of a problematic element later. But I also like that the seven in this film are seen more as a race apart. They're another magical race as opposed to just short people, like they were kind of viewed in the original. They actually bear more of a resemblance in terms of the character design to gnomes. you know, like garden gnomes and whatnot, and their kind of connection to nature and so forth. The fact that their heads are a bit larger than their bodies. You know, again, they gave me the impression of garden gnomes. So I think that despite, again, one of the more understandable criticisms of this film before it came out was actor Peter Dinklage talking about how, you know, he particularly had worked very hard to create an image of little people and short actors as more than just dwarves and fairy tale creatures and goblins and whatnot and what have you. And he kind of felt, his statements were that he felt like it was kind of a slap in the face that in the 21st century, 2024, 2025, that they were basically kind of going all the way back to one of the earliest possible stereotypes. And I understand that. I think that is a valid criticism. I don't feel it's one that I am equipped to discount or challenge. I obviously am. There's nothing about me that is little. You know, not a damn thing. So I cannot speak to that, and nor would I try. I would only offer this, and I would be interested to know what people in that community actually think. While I understand where he is coming from, but the question I would have is that something like this seems like it would be a wonderful opportunity for smaller actors to actually have big roles in a big budget Hollywood picture. And so, well, again, I think that Mr. Dinklage, and I have great respect for him as a person, as an actor, is speaking from the heart and is genuine in his concerns. I wonder, do others in his community feel that same way, or do they kind of feel like, you know, hey, this would have been a great job for us? You know, did we miss out on something? I don't know. That's a conversation I wouldn't mind hearing. I don't feel, again, I should be participating in it, but it's a conversation I wouldn't mind hearing. All right, so I've praised this movie. I've given it more than its due for all the things that I think it did right. But I do want to make it clear that this is not a perfect picture. You know, far from it. Truth be told, despite the fact that, yes, I found it enjoyable, delightful, I had a good time watching it, there are some things in it that I just didn't like or didn't work, or pointed to some pretty extensive flaws or issues with the film. And I'm not going to skate over those. We are going to talk about them. But I wanted to kind of front load my review with the positives for a couple of reasons, which I've kind of already gotten into, but just for clarity's sake. First of all, everybody has already dumped all over this movie. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find an actual good review for this film. You'd have better luck finding, okay reviews for it as opposed to a downright good one. So, everybody's already made this movie their punching bag. I didn't want to be piling on. And secondly, I want it clear that the issues that I'm going to talk about are, in my opinion, actual issues with the filmmaking elements of this movie, and not, as I am now going to affectionately dub them for all time going forward, ABCs, asshole bullshit complaints. Or, if we really want to get into it, C, ABC, conservative asshole bullshit complaints. You know what these are. We've already talked about them. The movie's woke. They cast a non-white actor to play a traditionally white character. Wah! You know, none of that shit. These are actual issues that I had with the making of this film and the end product. And I'm going to try to go from the least egregious to the most egregious, in my opinion. So here we go. So first off, it is overlong. It drags. I really do not understand why a movie about Snow White is almost 2 hours long. Like, there's no reason for that. I was just watching some guys doing a deep dive on the Hobbit movies and talking about how, those were all bloated and 3 hours long because that goddamn Peter Jackson made it like a must that every film has to be 2 to 3 hours long now. It's like what I wouldn't give for a good old, 90-minute film again. But, however, I digress. Part of that, part of the places where it drags, I like how all these kind of segue into each other very naturally, I like that, is the fact that while, yes, I've talked about 2 of the songs that I thought were actually quite good and entertaining, there are also other new songs that are just painfully generic, forgettable, and that take up way too much time. Snow White has kind of her traditional, am I the girl I'm meant to be? When will I be the girl in the reflection? When will I wish to be whoever I want to be? It sounds very much like the same added in song they gave Jasmine in the Aladdin live action. And yeah, it's just as forgettable, and it goes on forever. God bless Rachel, she is trying. Like, she is singing her heart and soul out, but there is just nothing there. It's nothing spectacular or recognizable or new. Ditto her duet with her Prince Charming stand-in, Jonathan. That's the character's name, not the actor's. I can't remember the actor's name. They have a little love duet, which they do in place of 2 far more fun and recognizable songs. They do it in place of the yodeling silly song that they did in the original, and Someday My Prince Will Come, which I know, yes, dated, but that is still one of the signature songs of this movie. You couldn't have updated that a little bit? Someday my hope will come, or someday my life will come, or something like that. And again, the song that they do sing is just, I like you, you like me, we're a happy family, I didn't know anything until this day, blah, fill in the blank. It's a Mad Lib. You can fill it in and plug it in any Disney film, and it would be there. It is, as much as I hate this song, it's not a whole new world, which is irritating, but it's original, so you can't fault it there. Segueing into that, let's talk about Jonathan, the Prince Charming substitute, who in this version is again kind of a Robin Hood character. He's he's stealing to survive and fighting in the name of the deposed good king, rebelling against the evil queen thing, and just like his song with Snow White, he is just another of, it's funny that, again, I mentioned that a lot of the Disney live action remakes are trying to get away from the established archetypes that Disney has had for so long, and a lot of their cartoons are trying very hard to make a statement of, we're not using those old archetypes anymore. But instead, they're creating all new archetypes. So in place of the faceless, generic, handsome prince, we get the smarm is charm guy. The guy who is just oh so sarcastic. His hair is just oh so flippy, and he's just too smart and smarmy and cool for the room. You know, that very irritating character type that has worked exactly once when Chris Pratt did it as Star-Lord, and has never worked again, not even in any other Chris Pratt movie. You know? And it's not the actor's fault. The actor is doing the very best he can, and he is fairly charming. He and Snow White have decent chemistry. You actually feel like they do like each other, and when he's kind of being a little bit more lighthearted and goofy, the character works, but when he's trying to be the lovable rogue, it doesn't play. This may also be a thing that just irritates me, but for a guy who's supposed to be living in the woods, he is way too clean, and his hair is way too manicured and well kept, and it does not fit with what we're being told about this guy. Backtracking a little bit, because I just realized I skipped over one of my complaints. While this is a very pretty film and a lot of the visuals are very nice, it suffers from that same issue that so many of these live-action remakes have, and that is that they just look washed out, and the color palette seems dull and doesn't pop. One of the things I think of, if I had to describe the Disney style, what is one of the aspects of the Disney animated movie style, especially the 2D films, it's the colors. The colors of these movies are just so rich and full of life. Think about all of the classic 2D animated films, and God, they are gorgeous in their colors. But their live-action equivalents are also washed out and dull-looking. And I finally figured it out. I think it's because so many of them are relying so heavily on the green screen that the world has to be oversaturated because of all of the composites and whatnot. I'm using all these technical terms probably wrong, but you get what I'm saying. The scene at the beginning and at the end where Snow White is actually in her village, and it is very colorful, and everybody's happy and singing and dancing, that looks great because it's real people on a real set with real lights, and everything is popping. But the minute we go into the forest, everything just becomes very flat. And I understand that that's part of the aesthetic. It's meant to look kind of like a storybook. You know, that's why all the animals are CGI and have the big kind of Disney literal doe eyes in one case. But it still gives the whole production a very artificial feel to it. It doesn't feel lived in and real. So, back on track, back to Jonathan. So, we talked about him, but there's a bigger problem than even him, and that is his gang. As I said, he is a Robin Hood type, so of course he's got his own little band of merry men and women. And these characters do absolutely nothing. They add nothing to this movie. They are the very definition of superfluous. These characters do not need to be there. They don't get proper introductions. They don't have distinguishing personalities. The only distinguishing personality is that they are all different races and creeds and sizes. One of them is a little person. And at one point, two of them are supposed to be like, have a love affair. They gaze at each other longingly, and it's like, and Snow White goes up to him and is like, oh, you and, I'm just going to say Ash, because I don't know the character's actual names. They never introduce her. You and Ash sure do care about each other. I'm like, they do? Why the fuck do I care? Like, and what makes me mad about this is twofold. Number one, it's like, this is clearly, like I said, a Robin Hood ripoff. You should have just bit the bullet and done Robin Hood and made it Robin Hood and Little John. Like the bear and the fox. You should have fucking done that. They already basically did a crossover here with Bambi. One of the deer is basically fucking Bambi. You might as well have done a 3-way crossover. What the fuck? Why not? Go for it. That would have been cool. And I think a lot of people would have forgiven a lot of things about this movie if they'd done that. But the more egregious problem is that what little that these characters do accomplish would have been so much better if you had let the Seven do it. Literally, the only thing these characters add to the movie is in one of the early leaked photos, these were the people that all of these whiny, cry, woke watch guards were all doing their videos on. Oh, look what they did to the 7 dwarves. These aren't the 7 dwarves. You're right. They weren't the fucking 7 dwarves. That's the only thing they added to this movie. Anyway, as I was saying, all of this would have made way more sense and been way more cost-effective, and in terms of the narrative, would have streamlined it if you had let the dwarves do it, or the 7 do it. I apologize. For their part, the 7 are fairly well characterized, but just like in the original, Doc, Dopey, and Grumpy get the majority of the screen time and are the most memorable. Whereas Sleepy, Sneezy, Bashful, and Happy are just kind of there. And it would have helped give them a little something more to do if they were like part of this gang, or they were helping this lone outlaw. One of the subplots with this group of superfluous characters is the little person is supposed to be like so great with a crossbow, and that comes back into play at the very end. It's like, that would have made so much more sense and been so much cooler if, like, that was Happy's role. That Happy was a great marksman, but didn't do it because he didn't want to hurt anybody. That would have been fucking cool and would have given him a character to play instead of just filling out the numbers. So, not all these characters don't add anything, but they actively take away from the characters that are there. And that brings us to the biggest problem for me. And I hate to jump on this because this is something that a lot of folks have talked about. And I have to say, unfortunately, I agree. The special effects on the 7 are revolting. These are some of the worst and most unpleasant to look at characters that I've seen on a movie screen in a long time. They just don't animate well with what they tried to do. I understand the thought process. A, they were trying to make them look more like their cartoon counterparts. B, they were trying to make them look more like gnomes, as we discussed. And C, that they were trying to make them look more like fairy tale creatures and not, quote-unquote dwarves. Again, pardon the terminology. So I understand the reasoning, but the execution it just did not work. It just doesn't work. They look like, have you ever seen, look through somebody through a peephole in a door, and seen their faces and kind of that walleye vision? That's what they look like all the time. And the disproportionate heads and faces are just freaky looking. I don't understand why, how anyone could see that and say, yes, that, especially for as long as this movie took, as long as it was delayed, Nobody saw that. I mean, this is on level of Ugly Sonic, in my opinion. And I don't understand, because to me, there were some very simple ways of fixing this. Number one, hire little people actors. All right? Peter Dinklage's not unreasonable criticisms notwithstanding. That's 7 choice roles for little people actors. You know, that might have been someone else's big break. You don't know. Maybe. So just do that. If you're not willing to do that, then for the sake of Peter Jackson and Jon Favreau, use forced perspective. All right? Forced perspective is one of the oldest, film tricks in the book. And yes, I know it means you'd have to use actual practical sets and not green screen all the time. Shudder. But those guys basically wrote the book on how to do it, so fucking do that. Do you think John Rhys Davies is really that short? He's not. If that's not an option, if you don't want to do that and you insist on these being creatures, then make them practical effects creatures. Make them like, you own the Muppets. I'm not saying make them Muppets, but contact the Jim Henson Creature Shop. Hoggle this bitch. And you would have had something that was still kind of ugly, but also lovable. There were just so many better options, and the ones they went with were just unfortunate. The dwarves, the 7 just do not look good. So yeah, I'm not going to say that this movie is without flaws or that there isn't room for criticism. But, so then why, if all of these things are there, and that's not a short list or an incidental list, this isn't like me nitpicking, these are some pretty egregious things, why then am I still going to give this film a recommendation and a good final grade? Because when I weigh everything together, the bad, the boring, the annoying, and the good, the question I ask is, did these elements ruin my enjoyment of the film? And for me, and this is my opinion, the answer is no. I still really dug this movie. I still had a good time. And I have to stress, I cannot say that about, I think, any other live action remake. I've viewed them as boring to completely worthless. And this one I actually liked. So yes, it has flaws, but none that made me leave the theater going, oh God, what was that? I left the theater feeling pretty good, feeling pretty happy, whistling some happy tunes. That is an accomplishment. So yeah, and again, your mileage may vary, but I'm going to stand up for this movie. I am going to be its defender. And you know what? I am going to quote Mr. Peter Dinklage. And from Game of Thrones, and say, I have a great soft spot in my heart for cripples, bastards, and broken things. I am the champion of Return of the Jedi. I am the champion of the Timothy Dalton James Bond movies. I liked X-Men Origins Wolverine. I am no stranger to finding enjoyment in films that everyone else has declared complete dumpster fires and worthless. I think this movie has something to offer. I think the good far outweighs the bad. And I think, in all honesty, people need to go see it, not because of all of these other issues, but because the real thing that the conservatives and Republicans and the woke police are really afraid of should be that message of, hey, look at how this rich person is using you and fucking you over to make their lives better. Maybe we should try another way of actually helping each other and listening to one another and not being assholes. Yeah, I can see why they're terrified of that message. So I think, yeah, you owe it to yourself, and if you are an active rebeller against the current status quo, prove it and go see this movie. And I do think you will enjoy it. So that's my soapbox. Okay, let's wrap this up. So final grade for Snow White. You know what? I think I'm being a little overly generous. And I kind of feel like I might rescind this when we get to the end of the year and I'm starting to think about best and worst lists. So this might come back to bite me. But I am going to say an A-. I know, because all the reasons I've listed, I don't have to go through them again. I liked this movie. I had fun at this movie. Here's how much I liked this movie. I was just kind of a closing out. As I left the theater, I kind of thought to myself, this is a movie I would like to own on DVD when it comes out. I'd actually like to watch this again. And you can count the number of live action Disney remakes I could say that about on the one hand of a bad woodshop teacher. So again, take it for what it's worth. That's my opinion. So there it is. So thank you for joining me. Thanks for coming along. And we will see you back here next time. And as always, drive safe. And I will see you at the movies.